All right, week number 2 of ESL Pro League Season 20 is in the books. The playoffs are on the horizon, and now we must look at the ashes left before us and decipher who is left to fill those remaining playoff slots. Group C and Group D went through vicious, brutal, holistic combat to find out which 8 teams had the right stuff. If the story of Week 1 was the dominance of Brazil and South America, the story of Week 2 is the meteoric rise of North American CS, baby! We're so back! And to celebrate this triumphant return of the American Empire to World Counter-Strike, make sure you guys take a second, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps out immensely in the YouTube algorithm. While you are down there, check me out on twitch.tv/LionHeartZ2. I stream Sunday through Friday at around 8:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Come check me out. Without any further ado, let's start talking the nitty and the gritty of what went down. Alright, so just like last week, because there is so much Counter-Strike to go over, we're going to be focusing solely on the teams that advanced out of each group, and then at the end of the video, we'll briefly touch on some of the more interesting teams who failed to qualify. Starting things off, let's look at Group C. Our 4 advancing teams out of here were Imperial and M80, Big, and Complexity coming through the last chance stage. Now, right off the rip, I think this group turned out way different than I or pretty much anyone expected to. When you look at the names in this group and you see Mouse, Imperial, Complexity, Astralis, those are the 4 best teams out of everyone else. Fnatic, M80, Big, Rooster, these are just tier 2 teams that are definitely a step behind, at least in name value. So when teams like M80 swept their bracket all the way through to a quarterfinal spot, and they beat Complexity along the way, and then Imperial beat Mouse on the way to their upper final appearance, that's pretty remarkable. And seeing as they're by far the biggest story out of this second week to me, let's start off by talking about M80 in particular. Now, first things first, I am going to direct you to a separate video I made about their second round matchup against Fnatic, where they broke the record for the longest CS2 game at LAN by playing 71 rounds on Anubis. 8 goddamn overtimes before we found a victor in that series. It was incredible, beautiful, sloppy Counter-Strike, and we did an entire breakdown dedicated to that, so make sure you go check it out. Let's talk about their opening round matchup against Complexity. Now, going into this, obviously, I'm a huge Complexity fan. I am Elysia's strongest soldier. Jason Lake, hi, how are you? Hopefully you're seeing this. So I was extremely confident that Complexity would be able to win this series, even if M80 surprised and took a map off them. But instead, M80 turn up and win it 2-0, and convincingly so. And the thing to talk about M80 is the meteoric rise of Lake as a talent. Lake is legit. This kid looks like he might be one of the best riflers in NA within the next year. He passes the eye test flawlessly, he has great fundamentals, his control with the M4A4 is really awesome, and it's just great to see some new NA talent that are starting to come up, develop, and show themselves on a world stage. And considering this team just lost Malbs to G2, I think everyone expected M80 to take a step back. But with Lake stepping in and filling that hole pretty seamlessly, I still think this is actually a pretty solid roster overall. Rek has his moments. Slacks is incredible with the off in his hand and had great moments throughout their entire upper bracket run where he was looking insanely dominant. Swisher and Sin, they do their job. They're serviceable. Sin especially seems to have a good head on his shoulders and calls a very simple but effective game as an IGL. And you know, this wasn't the best series from Complexity in terms of the star output. Elige was a little bit quiet, but the rest of the pieces on Complexity didn't look bad. It's just that Elige output would have made a serious difference. It's 13-6 on Ancient, it's 13-10 on Anubis, and considering how those maps are a bit puggier, they're a bit less strat intensive, they're more about being able to take your duels. If Elige is not going to be performing to the level we expect of him, then Complexity is going to struggle. So M80 take that one. They beat Fnatic in that second round series that we just talked about, and then they roll up to Imperial in the upper bracket finals and beat them 2-0 as well. Like I said, they swept all 3 series to get this quarterfinal spot. That's legit as hell. And in this series against Imperial, it was the Lake show. He top fragged both maps, he top fragged for the series, and yeah, definitely capped off an amazing debut for Lake on the world stage. Moving on, let's talk about the other upper bracket finisher, and that's Imperial. Imperial started off their campaign with a 2-1 win over Big, where they stumbled on the first map, allowing Big to take the early series lead, but they looked much more comfortable, much more in control on the final 2 maps to close it out. And honestly, I think Imperial are a little bit hard to clock right now because JesseTiv and Phelps were both great, which is what you would expect out of both of them. JesseTiv was amazing, especially in their next series against Mouse. But the overall fragging from the team seemed to be higher than usual. They were getting great games out of try and no way, and I don't know how repeatable that's going to be going into the playoffs. Obviously, if they take care of Big, I feel like they are as good or better than Big on paper, so I'm not surprised there, despite Searson having a great series and a great tournament so far, something we'll touch on more in just a minute. Then, and what was another surprise upset, they took down Mouse in 2 games. Now, admittedly, both were very close overtime affairs on Dust 2 and Inferno, but Mouse is supposed to be one of the very best teams in the world. These guys are supposed to be contending for trophies. Imperial is still kind of scraping around that like top 15, top 20 area, and really them playing this well, they played out of their minds in this series. JesseTiv especially, who ends the series with 60 kills, a 1.58 rating. Phelps rolling back the years right behind him with a 1.4. It was crazy just watching them out firepower this Mouse lineup when the firepower from Mouse from the entirety of their roster has been what has made them so good on the world stage this year. But for whatever reason, Mouse continue to have these weird performances at odd times where they just don't look the caliber of team that we know they can be. And here, Imperial were not only playing out of their minds, they capitalized on a Mouse that just didn't look as tight as they normally do. And that put them in the upper bracket final against M80, which we just talked about. And even though they lose to M80 and M80 made it not particularly close, M80 themselves were playing a ridiculous tournament to that stage as well. So it's really no big deal. And you're still in. You're in the playoffs. So it was literally the one series you were okay losing on this route. Just, yeah, man, goes to show once again, like we said in our first recap, Brazil is legit. They are definitely the second strongest region in the world. And this is just another really solid Brazilian roster. Next up, let's talk about our first lower bracket team to make it, and that's Big. And listen, I don't think anyone expected the change of adding Rigon to be as sizable of a change as it ended up being, but this is an entirely different roster, it feels like. Searson is having one of his best substantial tournaments in quite a while, and both him and Rigon continue to trade colossal performances as they made their way through the lower bracket. In their first matchup against Rooster, it was actually JDC and Tabson who stepped up to the plate, and it's pretty cool to see Tabson continue to show off these kinds of performances this far into his vast career with this lineup. Because we've been talking about Tabson as one of the best riflers in the world for quite a while now, and we went through this sizable period of time where Big as a roster languished and his play withered, and we were wondering if he was ever going to make the jump to go to an international lineup and utilize his prodigious skills somewhere else. But no, he stuck it out, he grinded it out, and now this roster is really starting to come together. Like I said, Rigon has fit in very well, and they looked good here in all of their series. They move on, they played Fnatic, they took them down 2-0, which was pretty nice. BlameF played out of his mind, but it wasn't enough to handle the gargantuan play from Searson with the AWP in his hands throughout this series. And listen, good on Big. They should be beating this Fnatic lineup. They are frauds, and I really hope BlameF gets to a better team at some point. And then, in the lower bracket final, they pull up against my boys, America's Great Hope, Complexity, and Germany. They break my heart because they beat Complexity 2-1. And frankly, Complexity did not look good. Even in their win, it looked a little bit choppy. The first 2 maps were super close affairs. It's 13-10 on Ancient, comes down to the wire. Rigon is leading the way for Big, having a great performance himself. And even though Grim held it down for Complexity and kept them in this game down the stretch, nobody else seemed up to the task of stepping up beside him. halzr, JT, Floppy, Elise were putting up just only okay numbers, and that left the overall fragging lacking. Complexity make up for it with a utilitarian win on Vertigo, but frankly, Big had a lot of chances down the stretch to close this out. Floppy, though, had a great game. Grim maintained his performance from Ancient, and halzr and halzr, they had just okay games. We haven't seen that, like, great, top 5 player in the world halzr yet in this series, and that's what Complexity needs to be super competitive. And then it was a vintage Complexity collapse on Dust 2, where Big put in a Brobdingnagian performance 13-1 and shut the door on that series. All joking and Big synonyms aside, I think Big showed a lot of promise here, and I'm happy they're making it through to the playoffs. I think they're a team that could be a little bit surprising, and if they continue to perform like this, they might be a threat to take a playoff series off of somebody who's not going to really expect the most out of them, which would certainly be quite enormous. Boom! I knew I could get one more in there. And rounding out our Group C advancing teams, let's talk about Complexity, who had the weirdest route to the playoffs in all of EPL, because being a Complexity fan is nothing if not a wild ride every time they turn up to an event. Like, I don't know how to explain this, but Complexity lost to all of the teams you would expect them to be able to beat comfortably, and then smoked all the teams that you think would give them a lot of trouble. They lost to M80, they lost to Big, but they beat Mouse twice and they beat Astralis twice on their route to qualifying. Like, what the f? Why do you do this to me, Complexity? I haven't hurt you. Why can't you guys just be consistent? Please. They lost to M80 in their opening series like we already covered. They then played Astralis, where they 2-0'd them, admittedly in two very close overtime affairs on Vertigo and Inferno. And here the important thing to note is that HeartZ had himself a day against Astralis. He looked incredible on both of these maps, opping out of his mind. He looked so comfortable. And then Bubblesj was right behind and playing just as well. For the series, both of them dropped 56 and 54 respectively, with 1.3 ratings to the both of them. And that's the kind of fragging that makes Complexity a real threat, when Bubblesj can be free, unburdened by what has been, knowing that his teammates are going to be there to clean up the scraps because he's going to blow something open right in front of you for you to take advantage of it. This was peak Complexity. They then followed up by slapping the absolute shit out of Mouse, 2-0, 13-8, 13-6, Vertigo and Nuke, Bubblesj, HeartZ having a field day against Mouse, which is remarkable because Mouse routinely own Complexity. At this point, man, I'm ready, dude. I'm fiending to agenda post about how NACS back Complexity are an actual top 10 team, and everyone needs to stop doubting the boys. And then they lose to Big. Like, guys, what? Okay, whatever, no big deal. You guys just have to play Astralis again. You guys already beat him once. You can beat him twice, right? Oh shit, they did it. Beat Astralis again, this time 2-1. So Astralis, you know, they capitalized on how close the first matchup was, at least. And the part that is so very important when you understand this team and have watched them as much as I have, they beat Astralis while Bubblesj did not have a good series. Bubblesj was good on Vertigo. He was good on Vertigo. He wasn't great, but he was good on Vertigo. They took that first map. They then got stomped out on Inferno. And on Nuke, they pulled out an overtime victory with Bubblesj bottom fragging, which is so unusual for this lineup. I can't tell you how often that doesn't happen. And it was HeartZ, Grim, and Floppy across all three games who stepped up, with JT calling great after great game. They were able to absorb a 30 bomb from Device and shut them out of the series. That is so good for Complexity in terms of their morale, because they managed to survive Bubblesj being totally missing. And it was HeartZ, like I said, having an incredible series, a 1.5 rating on Nuke, 27 kills. HeartZ overall having an incredible tournament and being so good for this team when they needed him most, kept Complexity alive and allowed them to swipe that coveted last playoff spot. Alright, so that's Group C done. Thankfully, Group D played out pretty much exactly how I thought it would, which makes my life as the recap guy significantly easier. Advancing out of Group D were Vitality, Liquid, Virtus.pro, and Furia coming through the last chance stage. Get into it, there's not much to be said about Vitality. They were pretty much never going to lose to Atox unless, you know, the sun disappeared. Made quick work of them, 2-0. They made quick work of Furia, 2-0. No surprise there. And then in the upper bracket final, they had an incredible 3-game set against Team Liquid, where Team Liquid took the first map and looked like they were in control, but something happened in between the first and second maps. Maybe it was the swaggy new jerseys that Vitality were wearing, but they came back a different team, and it was a different series from then on. On Nuke, it was a 13-5 affair, where once again Vitality continued to be one of the best T-sides in the entire world, and then on their CT side, they managed to make Team Liquid look tactically silly, allowing them to win exactly 0 of their T rounds. And honestly, it's not even like Liquid were playing that bad, they just ran into a bank fault named Vitality, and there was no amount of heroics from Twists or Ultimate or anyone else who could make a difference on Nuke, We move on to Dust 2, and it's pretty much the same story. It's 13-9, it's a little bit of a puggier map. Ultimate and Twist have a little bit more freedom, so it's a little bit closer. But again, what's the golden rule? We go over it every single time it comes up, guys. Don't play the French on Dust 2. Vitality, of course, are a dominant Dust 2 team, and they showed it here. Apex was looking incredible. Zaiwu didn't even have to go into heroics. He just played a very calm, centered, like average game. And then Flames and Spinks continue to be one of the best two-man rifling cores in the world. So yeah, shocker, Vitality advanced to the quarterfinals. But I'm also pleased to say that Liquid were right behind them. Liquid also advanced through to the playoffs in the upper bracket. They smoked that fraudulent ass ENCE lineup without even looking back. They took care of Virtus Pro, also frauds, not surprised. And listen, yeah, they lose to Vitality, but no big deal. Vitality are arguably the best team in the world. Not a sweat. Liquid are still in the infancy of this lineup, and the best part about that is that Ultimate has continued to show why he is the most powerful Roland from Poland we have ever seen. He's continued to look confident, secure, and aggressive with the AWP in his hands, and he adds a dimension to this team that is so necessary, because Twist still playing well, Naf still solid, but there's no one else who's a real killer on this lineup outside of Ultimate and Twist. Naf, JKS, these guys are very passive players. So you need that X factor from Twist and Ultimate to make this team shine, and Yukindar has settled into the entry role very well, and if he could blow open a hole that Ultimate or Twist can exploit, then yeah, Liquid looks really good. And then Naf, JKS, these guys are really good for the clutch, they're really good to anchor, they're going to be solid, they're never going to have terrible games outside of a few odd examples, they're going to be steady. So if you could continue to perform at this level, Ultimate looks legit in tier 1, then Liquid are going to continue to be a dangerous lineup in my eyes. Now listen, I don't think I could ever be accused of having bias, because in all fairness, everyone knows how much I hate this Virtus Pro lineup, but I have to give them credit. They did not look wretched here. In fact, they kind of fit into this typical Virtus Pro formula that we saw from earlier in the year, where they struggled against the teams that are definitively better than them, but they are a great wall, a gatekeeper to all the teams that are below them, and they weren't allowing upsets. They made short work of the Red Canids in their opening matchup, that's not surprising at all. Fame and Flit continue to show why they are so good as a duo, and frankly, if Jame and Electronic could figure it the out, this team would have an insane amount of firepower, even relative to some of the best teams in the world, but because Jame and Electronic are so inconsistent as stars, that's why Virtus Pro continues to fall flat. Slight tangent, I know, but listen, I'm having to be charitable to Virtus Pro, I have to get my licks in somewhere. Obviously, if they lose to Liquid in the next round matchup, that doesn't surprise me at all. They drop down to the lower semis where they beat Falcons pretty convincingly in a 2-1 set, which I only really have one gripe about, and that's the fact that Virtus Pro shouldn't be conceding a map to a team like this. We know Falcons are a dead lineup walking, and they just aren't that particularly good compared to what Virtus Pro have on offer, but they still lose Dust 2 in overtime. They have to scrape through an overtime victory on Vertigo, and then etch out a 13-11 victory on Ancient. Whereas if they were just more consistent as a unit, I feel like they would be stomping the Falcons routinely. And again, to be fair, outside of Vertigo, Electronic had a great series, and when he's on, you see the potential of this lineup. When his aggression works, it adds that X factor to this lineup. It's just for whatever reason, Electronic has been a ghost of his former self, and I don't know how he figures it out. They followed up in the lower bracket final where they beat Furia 2-1. Furia takes the first map Dust 2 in overtime, but in the following on Vertigo and Mirage, Virtus Pro actually cleans it up rather nicely, 13-7 on both maps, and made sure to not give any gaps to Furia to exploit. They looked very solid on these closing two maps. Overall, this has been a much better tournament than the other ones previous with this lineup, and yeah, they're in the playoffs. Congrats, Virtus Pro. I really don't expect you guys to do anything with it. Now, the video is getting kind of long, so we're going to speed through a couple of these early Furia matchups to kind of keep things more concise. Furia are our last team to qualify into the playoffs of EPL Season 20, and honestly, they could have qualified sooner. I really think they had a shot to beat Virtus Pro in the lower bracket finals. They couldn't do it, so they had to drop to the last chance stage. On their way in that, they obviously beat Falcons in their opening round, they lost to Vitality right after, they dropped down, they beat the Red Canids in their lower semifinals matchup, and then obviously lost to Virtus Pro like we just talked about, which means they dropped down to the last chance, where they took care of Atox pretty soundly, and then beat the Red Canids 2-0 to make it into the playoffs. Once again, a convincing victory, their second of the tournament over Red Canids. Instead of focusing too much on the individual games here, I want to take a minute and talk about kind of where we're at with Furia after the Skulls move. Because while I think it definitely moved the needle, I still think overall there's a lot of problems with this roster. And in the context of how there seems to be just more and more teams popping up in Brazil and South America that are looking very good in these tournaments, I still think Furia are a step behind the competition. Because while previously, yes, it was just the JesseTiv show. If JesseTiv didn't show up, this team didn't have a chance in hell. I do believe we've moved the needle a little bit where Cello, Yuri, they've looked better since the player break. Fallen has his moments, and Skulls fits in well with the system, so this team is somewhat less reliant on JesseTiv having an incredible top 10 player in the world type performance. But they still absolutely rely on that, especially if they want to go far in any event. So when JesseTiv does have a slip up because he's human, that's when this team really starts to step back still. One thing seems absolutely clear to me with the current state of Pro CS2 at the top level. Teams that are reliant on one superstar player to carry their team are going to be the most volatile in this format. All of the best teams in the world have great second, third stars right behind their superstar max player to really help when those players don't have great games. Vitality has Spinks and Flamesy behind Zywoo, Mouse and Na'Vi are ensemble teams that are greater than the whole of their parts. G2 are basically an FPL mixed team of superstars with Snacks and Hunter just along for the ride, etc, etc. You start to see my point. Furia desperately need a second star next to JesseTiv, and there are a lot of names in the Brazilian scene that could possibly be, and the longer they wait to capitalize on that, the more in the dust they're going to be left behind as the rest of the scene continues to grow. So listen, they're in the playoffs, but I don't expect them to do too much. With that, let's go ahead and talk briefly about some of the teams who didn't make it. Out of all the teams who didn't qualify out of these two groups, the real standouts to me are Astralis and Mouse. I've already said my piece about Mouse earlier in the video, so let's take a moment to talk about Astralis. I think this team really doesn't have a whole lot going for it. I think on paper they look alright, and Device seems to be okay as an IGL, and his personal level hasn't seemed to dip much at all, but the rest of the fragging around him seems pretty fraudulent. Like, Stown, Yabby, and Stair just haven't landed like I think people expected them to. Bro is just kind of happy to be here. He's definitely not good enough for this level. And then, like I said, Device has been good. He hasn't been Device, like he hasn't been Superstar Device for a few years now. And obviously you can't expect that if he's going to shoulder the responsibilities of calling. But again, as I've talked about in other videos, being the op and the IGL is the poison chalice. And I'm just waiting for Astralis to blow it up at this point. I don't think this roster has any upside. Alright, there it is, my gigantic second week recap for ESL Pro League Season 20. Going forward, we're into the playoffs, so expect daily playoff coverage here on the channel, so make sure you subscribe if you're into that. These videos are powered by Advanced.gg. If you check out their website in the description, browse any of their excellent products, and decide to make a purchase, you can use my code LIONS10 at checkout for 10% off, and it lets them know I sent you their way. Thank you to Advanced.gg. Shout out to my channel members, Justin, Jesse, Furley, Bubblesj, and Dr. Cocktor for keeping the lights on. If you want to become a channel member for $5 a month, you can support me directly. Check the link in the description. Also, while you're down there, follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/LionHeartZ2. I'll be streaming tonight around 8:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I hope to see you there. Other than that, my name is LionHeartZ. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you tomorrow for another recap. Peace.